It is often said a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when you're doing a presentation, 1,000 words can go a long way towards connecting with your audience. And perhaps what you'll be needing is a presentation aid so that you don't have to speak those 1,000 words. You can show them pictures, you can show them videos, you can get them involved. The success of your presentation will be judged not by the knowledge you send, but by what the listener receives. In other words, we can give a lot of information, but if it doesn't connect with our audience, it just goes right over them and we fail at our goal. So we can absolutely use presentation aids to make complex things understandable for our audience so we connect with them. What we're going to talk about is the varieties of presentation aids, tips for preparing them, tips for the use of them, software, and of course, speaking when presentation aids fail. Here's something to consider about presentation aids, that when you use them, what we're actually trying to do is get the audience to retain more. This graphic, for instance, tells you a little bit, or a ballpark figure, of how people remember things. If we only read it, we get about 10%. If we read and hear it, we're up to about 20. 30% is when we can see it. That's the beginning of our presentation aids. And you mix that in with lecture, we're up to 50%. Now, unfortunately, we can't always ensure discussion, but at least we're building our way towards it to where they can experience it and they can teach it. Now, our main concern is get to that 50% so we know we're connecting with our audience. If we stay on track with our presentation, our audience can follow along and know where we're going. And presentation aids are expected in very many situations. Everything from online learning, as you're doing now, classroom, to board meetings, to sales reports. All those have an expectation of some type of visual aid. The main thing to remember when we're using visual aids to enhance our presentations is use it when needed, put away when it's not. In this way, it does not become a distraction. And I'll repeat this a couple times throughout our lecture so that hopefully you'll remember that. The different varieties of visual aids, there's a lot that can absolutely be used. Oftentimes, props are a great way to do it. Now, props aren't used as much now that we have software and we have the ability to do PowerPoints, etc. But a prop used to be the primary one. Small models, perhaps a lightsaber, anything that really kind of connects to your audience as well as to your topic. It's there to support what you're saying, not overwhelm it. Props are especially important. Reveal them when you need them, put them away when you don't. For instance, if I was doing a speech on cookies, I can't bring out the cookies and leave the cookies in front of me the entire time because people will be thinking about the cookies. Instead, you bring them out, show them the cookies, and put them away. That makes it much easier. Pictures. Now, we used to use a lot more of whiteboards and paper that we flip, poster boards, etc. In that method, we can absolutely show something to our audience so that way they can follow along. Using pictures, non-moving, something where we can expand or maybe show statistics, maybe show graphs. All these are important visual elements for the audience, such as the pie chart, organizational chart, flow chart. All these are different forms of statistical and picture information that you would share with an audience. Finally, multimedia. We've gotten to that point. This is multimedia. I'm here, you hear me, I'm moving, I'm talking. Yes, it is still linear communication, but you feel more connected than if it was just me showing you the slides with perhaps notes along it. So this is a much more effective method. Of course, when you're doing a presentation in front of a group, it really wows them. So multimedia is a good tool to use. There is a little guideline I want you to remember with multimedia, a video clip. you only want to have it be a small percentage of your actual speech. You don't want to show a 5-minute video in a 6-minute speech. Instead, for about 3 to 5 minute length of speech, about 30 seconds is a good amount of time that you could utilize for showing a clip. You don't want to go over that because otherwise you're supporting the video clip, not it supporting you. Tips for preparing your visual aids. Aim for clarity and simplification. I know PowerPoint and many of the tools we use can do incredibly cool things, and that's where it leads you to death by PowerPoint, where you overwhelm the person's sentences and they can't even pay attention to you because you have things bouncing on the screen, things bouncing off the screen, shutters opening and closing. So you want to keep it simple and you want clarity. Don't get crazy with the colors. Don't get crazy with the font. Keep it simple. Next, bigger is better. Make sure your audience can see your visual aid or your presentation aid, because if they can't see it, what good is it? If I hold up a small pencil in front of my audience and I talk about a pencil, they can barely see it. On the other hand, if I put it on a big slide behind me, I can explain different components of the pencil, from the lead to the wood to the eraser, and the audience can see it, which will make them more involved. Keep the text easy to read, less playful, more straightforward. The more elegant it gets, the more difficult it is to read, the less attention the audience pays to you because they're trying to sort out what you're saying. Consistent font throughout your slides. You'll normally want a simple font, Times Roman, things of that variety, and about a 20 font when you're talking about PowerPoints. Maybe larger, it depends on your audience size. Limit the number of fonts. Don't be changing them out frequently. You know, it might look really kind of cool to go to Old English to Comic Sans to Times Roman. It's still going to be confusing, and your audience will be wondering, what are they trying to say? Why are they changing the font? So limit the number of fonts you use. Use color carefully. Black and white is a really good, solid one to use. Why? Because it stands out. Now, if a person has visual limitations, it could end up being that you use two colors that they are unable to tell the difference from. And when that happens, they're not even going to see what you've written. So make sure you're using it carefully. And remember, not everyone has full color vision. Now, because I am presenting online, sometimes I sneak in a few more lines than I should. I understand this. However, you're kind of going at your own speed. You can pause it. You can also look at my PowerPoints. However, if I'm going to present in front of a group, there's something called the rule by sevens that is a good idea to stick to. This way you keep your slides simple enough, even if you have to add additional slides. The rule of 7 is 7 words across and 7 lines down. By following this, you don't overwhelm your audience with too much. I have had presenters that put up a slide behind them that was full. It was full, everything written from the top to the bottom, page and a half of information. And their answer was, all right, I'm going to give you a few seconds to read this. Well, there's a couple things here. First of all, remember when you're presenting, you have that adrenaline flowing. And so waiting 10 seconds for you is difficult. Meanwhile, your audience in 10 seconds may only get to that second paragraph, or maybe sitting in the back and they can't read it. So if you follow the rule by sevens, it makes sure that your audience is following along with you, that you're not wasting time, and that the information is clear. Besides, you don't want a full outline on your slide. What you really want is things that you can read and expand upon, such as I just spent a couple minutes probably talking about the rule of 7 from one line. And that is what you will do when you're presenting. Remember, additionally, if you're using the wrong font, it absolutely can send the wrong message. That's why you want to keep the font simple. I found this humorous up here because it's an advertisement for a daycare. And once after you put it into this, it looks like a kidnap note. So you want to be careful. Horror script is a good one to avoid. You want to make sure that you're not sending two different messages. One with what you're written, and the second one with what the font is you chose. Tips for presenting with aids. Watch your back. Know what's behind you and what slide you're on, because that can be confusing to an audience when you're talking about one thing and then you look back and you realize you forgot to forward it 3 times, and so you don't know what's going on. Or perhaps if you're using a prop or something of that variety, you don't want to be tripping over it, falling over it. So know where you are on the stage, where your prop is at, when it's put away, when it's out, know what's on the slide, and in this way you can make sure you avoid errors. Trust your audience. If your audience suddenly looks bewildered at you and is pointing to your slide, you might need to turn around and take a look at your slide. Or if the feedback is they're confused, don't advance that slide. Take a moment to expand further on until you start getting some nods in the audience and you can get that positive feedback where you know you're connecting with them. Nail your timing. This is a difficult one. In the start, it's really difficult to get the timing correct because we usually end up short. After you've presented for a while, your presentation ends up a little bit long and you have to cut it back. So practice with your presentation aid. In this way, you know what your timing is. Beware of the handout. Handouts, we always think it's a great thing. You walk into a meeting, there's papers in front of you, a packet of information, a flyer here, maybe a sales report over here. By having those out, you save time. You don't have to hand it out in the middle of a presentation, and you probably just ended up giving your audience something to play with while you're trying to present. So instead of just you presenting to the audience, their eyes on you, you hear crumpling of papers, you hear them looking through things in the book, they begin reading. So with absolutely handouts, give them out when they're needed and have them put away so they don't become a distraction. Additionally, one thing your audience doesn't want to see is the back of your head. When you're presenting with a PowerPoint or something of this variety, it's okay to glance to see where you are and glance back. That's fine. You can almost use them as you would your speaking outline. However, the main thing is you don't want to read the slide to your audience. Your audience is there. They can read it. They can see it in front of them. So to read verbatim exactly what's on the slide is helping nobody, and it's actually throwing you off a little bit. Another break from the book. When you are creating software, there are a couple things to remember about that people love the tools that the software gives to us. It can do so many cool things. You know, the screen can crumple up and fall away or turn into a butterfly and fly up into the sky. Those are distractions. You're not in a big budget movie. You're giving a PowerPoint presentation, or you're talking about sales, or you're talking about some type of information and organization that you're interested in, and you don't want to take away from your message. So big budget effects, leave them. Keep it simple so that way when you're transitioning, it's not some distraction. You want to make sure your text is following that 7x7 rule. At least a 20 font is a good idea. You want to have an object in there, not just words, because that can become kind of boring. So by putting in a picture that's related to what you're talking about, your audience kind of gets a visual aspect of it, those 1,000 words that we talked about, as well as getting your take on it. Finally, with the transitions, keep them very simple. Something such as what I do, click and it's to the next slide. I don't need any type of disappearing, fading out, zooming in. All I really need is to get to that next slide to give my information to the audience. Speaking with visual aids, you can also put visual cues on your notes. So when you have your speaking outline or your keyword outline, have something in there where you know, oh, it's time to bring out the prop that I bought. Oh, it's time to put it away. Perhaps you can even put, oh, I've talked about this, I can change the slide, I can move to the next slide. Time yourself using your slides. Too often people have no idea how long they'll talk on a slide, And so that really makes it difficult to know the overall length, because all I did is read through the slide and, oh, okay, it took me that long. But when you're actually up there, maybe you have a question from the audience you expand upon, and if you don't know what information you're sharing on the slide and you haven't practiced with it, you're going to be surprised. You can also use blank slides at times to help with the overall presentation. So if you have a blank slide in there, your audience will then refocus on you, and then you can go to the next slide. I don't use these very often because of the fact that normally you end up stuck on that blank one and you start talking about the next one before it comes up. So for me, it works a little bit better to keep it on pace that way. But if you decide to, absolutely go ahead and you can put some blank slides in there. One between topics, something like that, perhaps a transition between the introduction and the body of the speech and the conclusion of the speech. Those are good markers for them. Be ready for your equipment to fail. It happens. So you need to have some type of backup plan, some type of disaster recon. Well, what if my PowerPoint doesn't work? What if I don't have a clicker? What if something breaks? I've gone into a classroom, about ready to present, give lecture, and the bulb burns out on the projector. Fortunately, I have my notes and I have my keyword outline, and I can still present. It does lose a little bit because I don't have that visual aspect. However, you can still get through it. Break from the book. Remember to back up, back up, back up. This is something I commonly see. Students will rush into the classroom, they're ready to give their speech, and they left their flash drive at lunch or at home, and they have no way to get it. And matter of fact, that was the only copy they had. Stress, panic sets in, and they are unable to present. However, if they back up, back up, back up, they're fine, because you'll have your flash drive, then email it to yourself. It's then in your inbox and your outbox. 2 copies of your presentation. And finally, they can save it on the cloud. Oftentimes, you'll find the software that's utilized as a portal for the courses, it'll have some type of built-in cloud storage. Use that. You come into the classroom, oh no, I forgot my presentation. That's okay. I can pull it up on the computer, download it, and present. So back up, back up, back up. Have a fallback plan in case technology fails. You can have handouts ready. Of course, you bring them out when they're needed and put them away when they're not. You can have alternate versions. You can have a version, as I mentioned, on your note cards in a speaking outline, perhaps even printing off your PowerPoint so that way, if you need to, you can fall back to it. Create a PDF, that's another method, as well as, if you have to go to the backup, describe aspects of it that they might be missing. Now, don't go into the description such as, well, what I had here was a pie chart where it showed 15% people responded this way and 30%, and that was red. No, no, no. Just break it down to statistics then. 15% of the respondents, 30% of the respondents. Something of that variety. You don't have to go too in-depth because that picture is 1,000 words. You had 1,000 words to each of your slides, you're going to be up there a long time. So finally, we talked about the different varieties of visual aids that can be used. We talked about tips for preparing for their use, the software, and finally, speaking while using presentation aids. Remember, you're going to need to be facing your audience, not your slides, and you're sharing with them, and your PowerPoint or your presentation aid is there to support you, not to dominate you. So remember, sometimes visual aids can be overly relied on, in which case it becomes a torture for the audience. So don't torture your audience. Keep your slides simple so that way you enhance your speech and connect with the audience.